The very concept of a flying fortress, a self-defending bomber, was called into question.
They wanted the B-17s and the rest of them to simply fight their way through, fight off the enemy fighters with defensive firepower, and succeed that way. It did work. You had to have fighter coverage.
At stake was the entire Allied war effort. If the German military-industrial base was invulnerable, its armies and air force would continue to dominate.
You're not going to be able to actually land on D-Day. You're not going to be able to win the war in Europe, win the war at all, unless you have a long-range escorting fighter. And so they actually pull back for several months while they're scratching their heads. The whole air war is, point, counterpoint, check, counter-check. We need to figure out what to do. So in fact, although it's not well known, American strategic bombing of Germany grinds to a halt between late October of 1943 and the beginning of 1944, which is cutting it very late.
The solution was a combination of American and British engineering and a bit of luck. Early in the war, the British had turned to North American aviation's Dutch Kindleberger to build a fighter to challenge the German blitzkrieg.
Kindleberger said, I'll tell you what, you give me 100 days, and I will come up with not just a design for you, but I'll build you a prototype. You fly it around and see what you think.
And in a record 102 days, North American designed and built what would become the P-51 Mustang, a sleek, highly maneuverable modern fighter, but it had a problem.
In their trials, they discover that while it has many wonderful maneuverable capacities and capabilities, it just doesn't seem totally effective over 19,000 feet. And our bombers, and the American bombers especially, are flying at 24,000 feet. So it can't protect them. Therefore, they think it's not going to work. So they actually turn to the most experienced test pilot from Rolls-Royce, and they bring Ronnie Harker down. And the story is quite gorgeous. It's almost a Steven Spielberg movie. But then he says, I've noticed that the front end of this P-51 is about the same length that would take the brand new, ultra-powerful Rolls-Royce 61 engine. So they set out to drop in the Rolls-Royce engine, bolt it up, and then Harker takes it and flies it. And when he comes down, his report is just something that blows your mind. It blows the mind of any aerospace historian. He says, it's still as wonderful and maneuverable as ever, but now with this engine in, I can get it up to 40,000 feet and it can fly 440 miles an hour. I think this one can escort our bombers all the way to Berlin. And the transformation is something which itself is wonderful, the transformation of the balance of power in the air.
Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, later remarked, "The day I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Allied tactics changed with the arrival of the Mustangs. They no longer simply escorted the bombers, they took the fight directly to the Luftwaffe, in the air and on the ground.
Today's orders were, pursue and destroy the enemy.
The Mustangs and other Allied fighters, like the P-47 and the P-38, were outfitted with additional fuel tanks and were able to range over almost all of the German countryside. One week in late February 1944 became known as the Big Week.
We're about to hit the Nazis for 6 consecutive days and nights. The Allies hope to finally win air superiority over the Luftwaffe. The liberation of Europe was at stake.
The Big Week set in motion the siege of Germany from the air that would continue until the end of the war in Europe.
The Mustangs plunged into the fight.
The Germans closed in.
Gigantic fighter battle raged across the European skies, with victories by our fighters alone of 60, 85, and over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed each day.
It was a battle with terrible costs on both sides. Scores of Allied planes and crew were lost. But the toll on the Luftwaffe was far greater. By the late spring, it had lost its air supremacy